I'm in New York, actually.
Oh, cool.
I'm about at 60 miles north of New York City. My town is called Goshen. It's where they built the new Legoland.
Yeah,
They
yeah, I know.
actually they
I've been there.
actually made a miniature me and put it in the Legoland, in the mini land, because there's a little display of my hometown. And I actually battled the people who were trying to stop Legoland a lot, and they were called Stop Legoland. And the Lego people really appreciated my efforts, and I have them. I'm immortalized in Lego.
That's an honor.
Yeah, I think so. More than a lot of things I've done. So,
Yeah. You've done quite a lot in your life, but
yeah,
it
like I
all
said though, that my memory doesn't remember every one of them, but I've done a lot of things, which is good and bad because there's things I don't want to remember that I do, and things I do want to remember that I don't. But it works both ways.
yeah, yeah. So much has happened since your Lego statue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd like to know, the beginning of it. So what made you want to like pick up a guitar and like really pursue being a musician?
I don't really. It's weird. I don't remember ever wanting to do anything but this. So, to say when I remember wanting to do this, I don't remember ever not wanting to do it. So, I think, there was, I'm gonna date my age, but back in the old days when we used to shop as kids, there was a place called the Sears Surplus store, which was basically like, an outlet store for Sears, where Sears would put the out of season stuff and other things. And, it was, my family didn't have a lot of money. So that's kind of where we would go to shop for things. And there was electric guitars that were up on the top of this one thing over a display for stereo equipment, I think, in the middle of the store. And I would just always stare at them, and I'm talking, this is age 3, 4, 5 years old, and then I got into the Beatles at a really young age. I had a record player, and the Beatles were kind of my first thing. And when I was in first grade or kindergarten, I sang "Help It" Show and Tell. So it's
Huh.
really been the only thing I've ever wanted to do. My luck comes in the fact that I had no backup plan. I had zero back. I mean, I was a smart kid. You know, I graduated at 16 and did junior and senior year together. I was a really smart kid, so I could have gotten into computers at the start of computers. When Apple was and Microsoft and all those things were coming around, and I easily could have walked into that, but I didn't. I just did this, so it was like I got pretty lucky that things worked out that way. But it's really all I wanted to do. As far as why I picked guitar, I just thought guitar was cool. I thought Ace Frehley was cool. My neighbors bought me Wings Over America for Christmas one year. I think might have been 6. I don't know. And I just remember looking at the cover of that record and seeing the Les Paul and the double neck guitar. And I was just really into the whole look of electric guitars. I try to draw them, and then I got one probably right around the age of 6 or 7. I got my first really bad guitar, and I didn't play that much. In school I started playing drums because there was no guitar classes, and my brother was a drummer, so you couldn't have two drummers. And I wanted to. Drummers hate when I say this. I wanted to play music.
Yeah.
So I went and it took the guitar side of things. So when I was 11 or just turning 11, I started taking lessons for a little bit, and then by the time I got to be 17, I mean, I started playing bars when I was 13 or 14, and pretty much full time in bars on weekends when I was 16, even when I was in high school. And I met, I got to meet Paul right when I was 17, turning 18. And that's when I got into heaven. And for me, I was fortunate that I got, to be in professional situations as a kid. It was really a lucky thing. Right place, right time, and it worked out.
Yeah, yeah. And even like, joining like Savatage, like you were 19, right?
Yeah, I
Like
mean the
that's
that
on
Dio, the
tour.
first Dio tour that I did with them on the Mountain King tour, I just turned 19 on that tour. And then when I, was asked to join the band, I was 20. And when Gutter Ballet came out, I just turned 21. So it was like, if weird back then, I was always the baby. Then we got into TSO, and I got Dave Z in the band, and all of a sudden he was younger than me. Now everybody's younger than me, and I'm just like, how did that happen?
Well, that is insane. You know, being in such a band like Savatage of being 19, just
Yeah, I
turning
think
19.
the whole thing was so overwhelming at the time because of the fact that that first tour was arenas. We were playing with Dio and Megadeth, and I was a huge Dio fan, and you're just watching that every night, and you had that laminate on, and you were able to walk. Even you had, I knew some bands when I was younger, and I actually met Prieston when I was 12, and I would get to go to concerts, but you'd always have to wait till it was done to get in, and this and that. And here I was, like, standing at the soundboard watching Dio after I just played, music at the arena, and I'm like going, this is crazy. And then you would get onto the tour bus, and just being on a tour bus in general was, I had my video games in my basement. Now my video game, I brought a video game on a freaking $1 million tour bus, and I'm traveling around the country with the Oliva brothers, and it was pretty surreal. I mean, the whole adventure, it was just so fun. There wasn't a ton of money on things for me at that time, but I didn't care if I had to pay. It was just like, this
Yeah.
is awesome. It was just a great thing.
That's so awesome, and it's so cool to hear and just know that. Like, you must have just been, especially with working with like Dio and Megadeth. And it's one thing like meeting artists, but it's another thing like actually entering that energy and that atmosphere, and being a part of a show. So it's really awesome. Now I'm just curious. You joined the band. So what was the process like? How did you join Savatage?
Well, here's the thing. Paul O'Neill got involved with Savatage, and he was producing the record, and Mountain King had a really big sound on the album, and he was just like, this record is too big to have one guitar live. Paul was a big two guitar guy. He worked in with Aerosmith, and he worked with the Scorpions, and it was just one of these things where the two guitar thing was really powerful to him in production and live, and that's how I got to that band. He came to me, he said he wanted to put me in the band, and then of course the band didn't want another guitar player, so they had somebody from Florida that they told the management they were going to use instead of me, and I was like, no way. So I paid to fly myself to Florida and audition with them, and it sounded so good right away that they walked out of the room and came back and were like, we want you to do this. And that tour, the Mountain King tour, was just weird because Chris really didn't know what he wanted yet. It's like he liked the way it sounded, but he didn't like the fact that there was another guitar player there. But I wasn't really taking away any of his attention. It was just I was there, and then we were really good friends, and I think that was the thing. We got along so well, and Oliva John always said to me, "I'm going to get you in this band." So one day, I did a couple other things for Atlantic in the interim. It's funny because between that end of that Mountain King tour and the time when they asked me to play in Gutter, it's like I did two records for Atlantic Records. This one thing was like a heavy metal rap thing called Big Mouth, and I was working on a record with Dirty Looks. And it's like, here I am, a freaking 19-year-old kid, and I'm getting multiple major label things thrown at me from Atlantic Records and their metal department. And then, when things didn't go right with Dirty Looks, I left that thing, and I got the phone call from the Oliva brothers, and they said they wanted to talk to me. So I went to the studio in New York City, and Chris Oliva's exact quote was, "Even though we think you're a dick, we want you to join the band." And that was, John and Chris were up on the roof of the record plant studios in New York City, and I did, and at that time, being really young, I was still working in bands with my brother, who was a drummer, and the business back then, if you were in more than one band, it wasn't cool. That just wasn't, it wasn't cool to cheat on your band. You were in one band or another band, and that obviously has changed a lot nowadays. I'm looking at people online that have released like 5 records in the last 3 months. It's a completely different world. I mean, A, you don't make as much money off the record sales, so you need more bands, and B, people just, they need to stay, like I said, for that particular reason, stay busier. And I just I think there was a lot of my age and the situation, and I think my lack of knowledge about basically how fortunate I was, the situation I was in. I walked away to try to work on things with my brother instead of staying in Savatage. And I think I could have done streets and still did the thing with my brother, but I don't know, back then it was just like my brother was almost suicidal because I was in Savatage for real.
Wow.
It's like I left him, and your band as kids isn't together and I'm on the road. So it was one of these things. But even on the streets tour, Paul O'Neill and the management had me learn the music and wanted to bring me back. Of course, they made this decision without telling the band, which didn't go over well with the band. And I remember getting a call from Wackles, the drummer, and he's like, I think I heard you're showing up in Baltimore tomorrow. And I'd already learned all the music and I was ready to go. And he's like, well, don't expect anything exciting to happen, because they got kind of upset that, they felt like, again, I was sort of being forced on them, especially after they were pretty upset with me because I wandered away when they made that position available, which I get that. And the thing that really crushes me about it all the time is, I lost those last couple of years of Chris Oliva's life, and he was one of my best friends, and I'll never get those years back. And not only was I on the verge of coming back into Savatage several times, but Chris and me, he almost even played in Butcher. It was like one of these things where we were just pretty close. And he wanted me to go back in for Edge of Thorns, and I was working with John on Butcher, and I'm like, I can't leave your brother. So it was like, as soon as John was out, right after the Streets tour, and as soon as that happened, I flew to Florida and was hanging out with Oliva, and that's when we just started drinking and writing the Dr. Butcher record. So I really was only away from Savatage probably from the end of 1990 to like the end of probably the middle of 92. There was only like a year and a half that I spent away from that band. There wasn't a lot of time,
Huh.
if that, and then I went back working with John, and then his brother passed, and then we both went back in the band. So it was one of these things, like I said, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I lost that time with Chris. Number two, I didn't get onto the Streets cover, which to me is a big identity piece of Savage's history, and I think if I was in that picture with my story and everything, a lot of fans sometimes distance themselves from me without knowing the entire history. There's a lot of the history I'm not even mentioning, that I'm not going to, that doesn't really deserve to be put out into the public eye. But it's like I really went through a lot with Savatage on and off stage. So, it just, for me, having Chris passing and losing him in those years, and then losing that piece of that history, when I see that cover, as much as I love that album, it breaks my heart, so it's like I should have been there. It was my own decision. And that's kind of where it's like, if I only knew, there's no way in hell I would have left Savatage now for any reason to do anything. I do TSO and other things. I do everything I do and other things. Back then, it just wasn't the model. You did one band or another band. In the same way that Chris wasn't going to do Butcher and Savatage, I wasn't going to do, my band with my brother and Savatage. And it's just, it like I said, it breaks my heart. And that's why when the fans and people talk about the band and that part of that history, I don't think they realize just how much it was really something that hurts me internally that I wasn't there. So I think they don't take into consideration just how important that band has been in my life. If you go and just put chronologically on, I never left Savatage the moment I got back, regardless of whether or not we were playing or not. Savatage never broke up. Everybody said ex-Savatage. It's like, we didn't break up. We just stopped playing. Savatage never broke up after 2002. That band never broke up. We just stopped. I mean, and so, for a good part of it, 33, 34 years of my life, Savatage has been in my life.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we got to do this interview because it's really, really cool to hear. And it's nice to like get a little insight on that. Well, like you were also just like so young, and everything moves
Exactly. And
so
that's the main
fast
thing.
for
I mean,
you.
I try to tell that to people. It's like you try to make decisions, and then you think your shit doesn't stink. That's why I always tell people. I said that experience for me was so important, and I get involved with people that'll get into the TSO band, and we were headlining arenas for 10 years, and they'll come in and do their first shows, and I always just try to tell them, like, look, man, don't ever take what you're doing in that response you're getting from that audience personally. Yes, they're loving what you just did, but don't ever let that go to your head. That's a blessing. It's not something that you should ever take advantage of, or think that you're going to wander that arena and go book yourself the next night and it's going to fill up. It's like those people were there to see TSO the same way people were there to see Savatage, and you get a different perspective on that. Yeah, I had a big part of the chemistry on Savatage on the Gutter Ballet tour, but I was not Savatage, and those people were there to see Savatage, and yeah, there was people who really liked what I did, and I think it was kind of, like I said, humbling to realize just how, I don't even see the words humbling. I think it was a wake-up call to see just how special it is to be something in something that special. When you get out there and everywhere you go, there's people there waiting to see that particular band, and that was my Motley Crue. You watch The
Yeah.
Dirt, you see how those guys. I wasn't at Savatage in day one, but I was in Savatage at a very crucial time in their career. They were going from opening to being able to headline, and that went from America to Europe and Japan and South America, and it looks like that was my thing. And luckily I was able to be a part of a formation of something else in that respect with TSO too, which was something from the ground up. It's a really special thing, and that like I try to tell people, it's like I never ever take that for granted, because there was a zillion things that Paul made happen with TSO that they happened because that's what that was, and that's what he did, and you're there and people like you. But I said it grounded me into always respecting where I am, where I'm working, who I'm working for, what they've accomplished with, and I never let things go to my head. And that, luckily, at a very young age, I was taught that lesson. Also, luckily, I started working again with John, and I got back into Savatage. I was able to get back. There's a lot of people who make those moves that can't, and some of them stay bitter about things their whole entire careers. Even if they become successful on their own, I watch people that still whine about things that didn't happen the way they could have or should have. But me, it was a grounding and a growing, it's not growing pains, but I was just growing up, as a musician, as a person. I learned a lot in that band, and I lived a lot out of the gate. It's like I was taught a lot at a very young age.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you've been in the band so long now, you know what I mean? And there's so much to look back on, I bet. And you telling me all this, it's like, wow, it is crazy, and it's such a crazy life you've lived so far. Now, I want to go back to the Gutter Ballet album. So what did you contribute to that record?
Well, here's the thing. I was working with Dirty Looks in the studio recording their Turn of the Screw album, which I had actually written a couple riffs on that were on the title track and one other song. And I recorded the basic tracks with the drummer, but me and the singer were kind of beating heads with each other. And he was like, play things my way or no way. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be playing things no way. So I got out of that band. And then Savatage called me up to play, and Gutter Ballet was done. The record was done. And Chris in particular, said, you can go and play things. And I was like, dude, you got the record finished. I don't need to redo what you did. It's going to sound the same. And at that point in time, again, rookie move, if I would have just went in there and played rhythms on all the tunes, or a track or two at something, people wouldn't bitch and say, oh, I didn't play. But I was my choice not to play. And that's like where another one of these things where it's like, dummy, because you you realize in that situation, you don't realize, but 30 years later, people were like, oh, fucking Caffery didn't even play on the album. It's like, yeah, because fucking Caffery was an idiot. There's a lot of people who were in Iron Maiden who didn't write any of those songs, that played
Yep.
on the records, or maybe not even on the records. You don't even know sometimes. But I had the opportunity to play on a record that I wasn't there creating. I watched John write of Rage and More in a tour bus, and I watched him, record the ideas for Gutter Ballet in rehearsal before the song was even done. I was still hanging out with those guys. I remember when John brought When the Crowds Are Gone to Paul, and he started listening to that, and Paul just freaking, his light bulb went on in his head on what to do with that song. And I was around through a lot of the creative process, and they just were like, you can play. And I was like, nah. The only thing on that record that really got recorded after the time when they asked me to join was Silk and Steel. And Chris didn't play the rhythm on Silk and Steel. That was played by another guitar player, and Paul wanted Chris to do his lead, and Chris didn't want to fly into New York to do the solo. So Paul called him up. He said, I want you to do this. And I'm in New York City with Chris Oliva, and he goes in the studio. He goes, O'Neill, you have one take. He looked at Paul. He says, you get one take. Now they started, and I had to stop the tape once for something, but they went back, and Chris played what you heard on that record in the one take. And Paul's not a one take person. Paul would have wanted 3 or 4, or had a chance to listen to him and then have him do one final thing and whatever, because Paul's a really detailed producer. And Chris was like, I'm done, O'Neill. And he's like, one more. He goes, I told you, you have one take. So we left there and went to a Mexican restaurant and drank margaritas, and he flew home later that night. He flew up that day, recorded his solo, went back to the airport, and flew home that night. And that's, that was what he wanted to do with that tune, and that had gotten done. But I didn't necessarily feel, like I said, bad about it. I was in the artists. I was with Gary Smith going over ideas for the cover art. We were putting the Ghosts here, and when the guitar was finally put onto the piano, that decisions about that kind of art were things that we were all talking about, and things to do that were going to make that cover cooler. And I was there with Gary doing art that wound up on our scrims on the stage, and designing t-shirts. And we all were just existing like a band at that point. I was kind of staying with the drummer Steve at he had an apartment on Indian Rocks Beach down there, so I was staying down at the beach, and I would go out and hang out every night. Savatage was the talk of the town in Tampa, so it was a lot of fun to be able to go out to the rock clubs and be in that band. And so that's basically where that was with Gutter. And then we did the videos and the photo shoots and all those things. So at that point in time, the record wasn't even called Gutter Ballet. It was called Temptation Revelation. It was going to be the name of the album, and it had a different song order. And I actually have a little piece of a sticker or something that says Savatage, Temptation, Revelation coming soon. And when Paul heard Gutter, and he heard the way that progressiveness was in the music with the keys and that song, and then Paul O'Neill wanted that to be the first video, he really changed everything over and said, look, we're going to, let's call the record Gutter Ballet. I mean, Paul was a producer, but he was kind of, like a producer that worked like a band member. He was like the 6th Beatle. So it's like we're in there, and it became Gutter Ballet. And that, a lot of people don't know that. So it's like I said, I easily could have played stuff on it. The funny thing is, when you listen to Japan Live 94, I did some of the rhythms on that, which people don't even know. So it's like I played on Savatage records people don't even know about. And then when Final Bell was done, obviously Chris Oliva couldn't replace any of his rhythms. We went to mix that record, and Chris had delay on his guitars a lot. And when me and him were playing together, it was easy to make the mix because we were side to side. But when it went to a guitar solo and Paul tried to put him up in the middle, if you didn't put him in the middle, there was no lead out of one side. So it became like an old Van Halen album, where you lose when he goes to play lead, if you have the wrong speaker on, you hear just bass, there'd be no solo. So we were trying to figure out how to make it work, and it really wasn't sounding right dumping. They tried to stereo my existing guitars and dump them kind of in the background of left and right, and that really wasn't working. So Paul said to me, he goes, "Would you mind re-recording two rhythm tracks for every song?" And I was like, "Why would I mind finding Savatage?" So I got to go in the studio, and that final Bell Ghost in the Ruins record, I got to do every single one of those Savatage songs in the studio.
Wow.
I myself, with the engineer for the most part, Paul would come in and out. But you want to talk about the ghosts? Imagine sitting there playing along with Chris's stuff, and Chris taught me to play. And I was doing stereo rhythms for Gutter Ballet, for Rage and More, for Hounds, for Mountain King, for Sirens, for all the. So not only did I get a chance in theory to play on Gutter Ballet, I played on all those records as a, not just a live thing, which I did tours with Chris. I did, to me, Ghost in the Ruins, that's not a, it is a live record because of Chris, but for me, it's a, it was a chance for me to play with him in the studio for all those songs. And I sat, you want to talk,
Wow.
like I said about the Ghosts, I sat in that studio room and played all those tracks. And that's how the mix of that record was able to work. So when you listen to that album, you're hearing a stereo me that was recorded in the studio to go with Chris's guitars. Like I said, obviously you couldn't replace Chris. He was pretty much perfect every show anyway, but you know, that was done in the studio. John eliminated some swears that were not in the lyrics, and then I did the intro, the deep voice that says "from Tampa, Florida." That's because I used to do that
Yeah.
live,
Oh,
so I did
wow.
that in the studio. We probably eliminated some of my jokes and swears because I used to do a funny one every night to make the band laugh. But yeah, that was what that experience was. So that live record's always really special to me when I go, if I'm posting something on the internet and I see a picture from the Gutter Ballet time, I don't put the Gutter Ballet recording from the studio on. I'll always put the one from Ghost in the Ruins on because that to me is just, you know, it was
Wow.
my opportunity to make up for saying, you let that record get out without you. It's like I wasn't, you know, I didn't let that stuff get out without me. So, you know, and like I said, we were cleaning up and doing the stereo stuff for Japan Live, and the same thing was done with that, except with Japan Live, there was times when Oliva was playing keys, so there was no guitar, so I had to add guitars, and you know there was things with that. But people, me and John did that together, you know, in the studio. I did that with Oliva because I didn't want to sound too different than him, you know, when he was doing his rhythms. So we fixed that up. So I'm on, like I said, I'm on a Savatage record and nobody knows about. And actually, the guitar solo section for Taunting Cobras is a Dr. Butcher riff. So I'm kind of on the handful record
Oh.
in that way. So, and there was, I think, one other, there was a riff on the Edge of Thorns record that was mine too. I forget which one it was.
Wow.
You know, just ones that you were writing that the Lever brothers would take and be like, "That's that fucking my riff." And so, you know, and you just have it, and they're like, "Oh wow, I forgot." Like, yeah, you forgot. It's because, but it's just funny.
Yeah, I am so glad I brought this up. That is so cool. That's great insight.
Yeah.
Now you can't say the same about Dead Winter Dead, which you had quite an impact on. I'd love to know the writing and recording process of that record.
Well, I mean, it was at that point in time when the Japan Live thing was over with that Savatage knew Alex was going to part ways with them, and we just, me and John got together with Paul and was like, need to go back, want you guys to come back into the band. You know, it was time for us to go there and keep Chris's legacy alive. And Paul had the idea for Dead When Are Dead. And, you know, John had written that record with him. And I went in and did all the rhythm guitar stuff on that album. And that's when that record was being done that Paul was like, you know, we wanted to get another guitar player in the band. And I forget which one of, somebody we knew Petrelli. I knew Petrelli since I was a teenager from the club scene, but you know, Al came in and blew Paul away right away with his lead playing, and he picked up a lot of that stuff on that record. And I had things like my solos for Dead Winter Dead and Doesn't Matter Anyway, and some other things that I was playing. But I, other than Christmas Eve 12/24 and the Mozart and Memories thing, it's like all the rhythms on that record were done by me. And Al did a lot of the lead stuff and a lot of the instrumental things with me on the other things. But it was fun. It was a really hauntingly spooky record that war was so recent, and you would go in there, and when you were listening to the bombs and Paul was mixing Sarajevo, he just did that record. To me, I think is probably one of my favorite Savatage records, and for a lot of reasons. I love Streets and the ones with the stories and this and that, but for me, Dead Winter Dead just really sets a mood. And we did that tour and went to Europe, and we saw people come from all over the world that really appreciated the lyrics and the way that song hit them. And Paul's lyrics always did that to everybody. When we played with Savatage, when I was a little kid, I don't think I ever really paid attention to lyrics as much as I should have. I was a guitar player, and sometimes you couldn't even hear what these singers were saying. Everybody sounded like James Brown. It's like I had my own versions of Priest and Maiden songs that were nowhere near like the actual lyrics. I'd be like, really? But, Paul, he always said to me, he goes, Chris, anybody can write a song about a car or a girl, but it takes, something really special to change somebody's life. I think, and meaning in the way that somebody like Freddie Mercury did or John Lennon did, when those lyrics hit somebody and really affect them. And I heard that from the fans. We'd be playing in Germany, and a kid would come there from, the Middle East or somewhere, saying that they saved this whole entire year to be able to afford to fly where we were and play, and that Savatage saved his life. And it was the first time I ever heard that. Songs like Believe and some of the songs on the Dead Winter Dead record, Isn't What We Meant, things like that really brought people together. And I think when we went to Europe and played that and watched those crowds, it was like, wow, it's like there's something there. And it was Savatage came alive again in that way, with that connection through the music to the fans. And then their love of Chris Oliva was obviously always there. We would go to places, and John would talk about it, and you would hear, like, you go to Greece and you'd hear the crowd go, Crease, 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 crease. So he was, he was a Randy Rhoads to those people. He was a legend, and same way to me. So, places like that, like Greece and South America, where I got to go with Savatage for the first time playing that music, there was a lot of, pressure to me emotionally to be able to go and play his music to these people, because they never had a chance to see him. So it was always really important for me to make sure that I gave them the best spiritual version of him musically that I could. That's why playing his stuff was always really important for me to play, as close as humanly possible. I never was going to play it exact, but he never played his solos exact live. So it's like, if you go off a little bit, sometimes you're just kind of taking the influence and doing it the way he did. There was a lot of things I did that people didn't hear that I heard him do live at certain times, and they would watch me play it live, and they didn't realize that I wasn't doing anything new. I was just doing a riff or a lick or something that I heard him do that they might not have heard, because I heard him do it at a live show. I did hundreds, a couple hundred live shows with him. So it was a different experience.
Yeah, you've done so much in the band. You're such a staple of Savatage. Legendary guitars. I also want to talk about Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Amazing. Gone off to do incredible things. What was your role in the creation?
Well, the funny thing about that is we didn't even the Savatage guys, we didn't even know exactly what was about to happen. I think Paul did. Paul always knew. TSO was a vision that he had. He used to tell me, he didn't say it by the name Trans-Siberian Orchestra, but Paul said that he wanted to do a band that had limitless creative possibilities, to where you could go and play a stadium, you could play on a street corner, You could play with one musician, you could play with 50 musicians, you could play with one singer, you could play with 30 singers, and do any type of music. And that's basically that window for him to have that whole thing came alive when, Savatage had 1224 get on our record, and it started to get that radio play, and it just all came together for Paul to have his Christmas trilogy start to be recorded, and to do the Christmas Eve and Other Stories record. Now, when that record was done and came out, we didn't exactly know what to expect. Atlantic Records really wanted to have a way to be able to get that song to radio, and you couldn't exactly go to all the holiday stations under the name of Savatage for the Christmas band. So Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which was Paul's way, Trans-Siberian Railroad is the longest railroad in the world. It connects the most cultures, and that's what Paul wanted to do with music. So, and we were just all a part of it from day one, because we were Paul's, we were the band he used in the studio. We were the band that he was using it to, that we were family. It was all one big giant TSO Savatage family. And we were all just a part of it, which for me, like I said, it was one of these things that was so crazy because we never really knew what to expect. Paul would talk to me on the phone. I remember one phone call, I was talking to him about something. And he said, now, Chris, when TSO headlines arenas, we hadn't even had a record out yet. The TSO record was not released. It was just at the time when the video was being filmed, I think. And he's already telling me when it headlines arenas. And I'm just going, okay, O'Neill. But, he always was able to make the impossible. I always call him like a magician in some ways. He would make impossible things happen. And, he would even say once we were out there doing arenas, now when TSO headlines stadiums, and if you look at the actual pictures of it, the attendance, and we were doing 2 shows in Cleveland at a day with 28,000 people, and 2 shows in Dallas, Texas, in the same day with 26 or 20,000 people. It's like there was a stadium worth of people watching TSO in a day. So, he accomplished so many things, and we were just able to be a part of it. We stood on stage. We did the Ghost of Christmas Eve special, and that's the first year that we were asked to go do the touring. We went up there and filmed that, basically as the band for the first time on a stage. It's like, okay, you got your kind of rock tuxes on, you're playing, you got the strings and the background singers, which we kind of had in the Gutter Ballet and Crowds video, where we had the little piece of orchestra. The orchestra was in both of those videos, that little piece of orchestra, that whole idea that Paul had then. And, then when we got to do the very first shows, I remember me and Johnny and Al, we were getting ready to go on stage, and we're like, what the hell is about to happen? We didn't know. We had no idea what it is we were going to do. Now, at that point in time, Christmas Eve, Christmas Attic, and the Beethoven record were already out. So there was a good catalog of music for us, which was really good because we were able to do TSO, not just the first record in that story, and be going out and doing just that. Paul wanted the whole rock theater thing, but he also wanted to have the rock band. So he wanted the second half of the show, the ability for us to show what we could do as musicians and be a rock and roll band. So that's why we were able to do some of the Beethoven's Last Night stuff in the second half. We were able to have, songs off the Attic in the set and other things just to mix it up. And it was just really, really cool. It just worked. We got up on that stage and we did those first 7 shows that year. And I was like, wow, it's going to work. There was something really special about it. And then from there, it kept exploding. And by the 3rd tour, we did 2 arena shows on the East Coast tour, one in Hershey, Pennsylvania. That was the first arena show. And then one in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which was only the second year we played in either of those markets. And it was already at arenas. And then in the following year, there was more arenas. And then the year after that, it was all arenas, which is to happen pretty quickly. It just caught on and people loved going to see it, and it just kept snowballing, and it was just really amazing to watch Paul's vision come to life. It was really incredible for me. I said, I feel blessed with that, not in the sense that I wasn't there, in the beginning with Savatage, obviously, but there was a beginning with Savatage that you weren't there. It's like with TSO, there was a beginning and you had a chance to be a part of it. So when you watch things, like I said, like The Dirt with Motley Crue, and you see them from their baby stage through the whole thing, it's like, you know, I had a chance to be in something that special from its baby stage. And for me, I consider that to be such a blessing because, you know, I always dreamed of being, you know, the kid that had a band that was like that, like the Guns N' Roses, and you know, you sleep in the rehearsal rooms, and it's not necessarily what order it happened for me, but you know, I did go through a lot of those things, you know, with my band, with my brother, and even with John and Butcher, we were literally sleeping in rehearsal rooms and working on it. So there was a lot of it pieced together in different ways and different things to be in that particular situation where I think TSO was just, you know, working with Paul, it was able to be put together so well and happen so, I would almost say perfectly, out of just the fact that Paul was just that, he was a perfectionist, so he had his visions, and you were there. But I always felt really blessed to be able to be a part of it, you know, to be in the studios from day one and to watch the music come alive and watch the whole thing. You know, Paul would bring in the album covers and be, look at this, I just got this from the artist, and this and that. Here's this, you know, we're doing this stage set, we're doing this and that. And there's even a TSO logo that has a lightning bolt in it that I had some stuff done for me on my faces stuff. I had some art done, and I used an artist that I got to do a TSO for them, and that's still used to this day. So little things like that you feel, you know, you feel special about because you were part of things. You know, I got to write some songs with Paul, and you know, like The Dark and Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It's like, so I got a chance to be in that creatively and on the records, and it was just a really great part of my career. I mean, obviously TSO was still going on, but you know, with Paul being gone, I at least had that chance to experience all this with him. I mean, for me, it's one of these things where it gets haunting a lot of the times. You know, when I do the Savatage stuff or the TSO stuff, you know, I always think of Chris and Paul and the people that were there, and you know, the ghosts of Christmas Eve. You know, it's always a great feeling for me to know that I had a chance to experience those people, because you know, Chris Oliva and Paul O'Neill, they were, you know, legends in heavy metal and hard rock and in the music history. And it's like, for me to have them as a part of my life was a blessing.
Yeah, and being there for the start of TSO, I could only imagine, like, gives you closure for missing some of those early days in Savatage. Like, you actually have to you
Yeah,
were
I guess
there at the start, you
exactly.
know?
I'm never gonna get back the time that I had missed with Chris, but when you play those songs and the Chris Oliva guitar goes up on a big video screen and comes alive in a concert, and you know, you're keeping his memory alive, and playing that stuff in front of the arenas. You know, when I walked onto the stages and played these Savatage songs with TSO, and these pieces of music that Paul did with Chris, and you play that, and you just, that power of those guitar things, and you just feel like, you know, he's up there smiling watching you do his stuff. And that, you know, I always believe Savatage would have gotten to that point with him. You know, I always wonder where Savatage would have been if Chris stayed alive. You know, if we would have, me and John would have went back to work with Zach and him, and you know, that whole thing, and nothing at all against what version of Savatage wound up following when he passed. But you know, you always wonder what would have happened if we were all around.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, in terms of like keeping a legacy alive and stuff, that's always happening. Like, for example, the vinyl reissues that happened very recently, which are pretty awesome. As someone who's a huge fan of like analog and just physical mediums, really awesome to see. Just because a lot of us weren't around, you know, for some of those
Yeah,
days
I
when those
mean,
albums
the
came
Night
out.
Castle people, Kenny and them, and they put together these records, and went through it piece by piece and went to everybody in the bands to see what they could find and did these finals and redesigned that for everybody. And it was fun for me because I was getting them one at a time as they were done, as the record company pressed them and got them to the management. Management was sending them to me, and I was opening it up, and it was like, you know, going through getting Kiss double platinum or Love Gun for the first time, and you open up that thing and you got that little paper gun that they had. And so it was like when you looked at all these little mini EPs and pieces of art and booklets, and there was photo shoots from Dead Winter Dead that I never even saw pictures from, and there was stuff from the Gutter Tour and things like that that you didn't even remember that necessarily you did, but that you were in. And you just looked at all this, and it was just like going into your own little history book, and to go through all those great records that way, it's awesome. And I'm just glad because, CDs were small, but digital is just on the computer. It's like everybody's the same. And in this sense, these pieces of art they're different. Everyone, you hold them in your hands. That's how we grew up. I love the fact that people can get your music right away online and listen to it, but there was always something really special about walking into that store and grabbing that music and bringing it home. And when things went to cassette, it got really small. When CDs came back, it was like, all right, it got a little bigger, and then you went to digital. It's like, okay, it's small again. And then when you see these vinyl, it's like, okay, this is cool. And you look back and you remember the way that was. That's how I grew up. I sat in a bedroom with a tiny little square record player that spun around in circles, and you would just keep putting it back to the part of the song you liked really quick.
Yeah. Well, that's cool to hear, and like I can totally relate to that because like I grew up in like the iPod Nano age, so like where the art was like super small.
Yeah, I wonder how many freaking millions of iPods are sitting there that nobody uses.
I know,
Because
but
the
that's
phone is an iPod, so it's like, all right, well, you limit. I have mine. I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere. It's here. I don't even know if the battery would still work. I'm sure probably would. Who knows? But that just came out, and it was like, wow, this is. When you first saw your own little record picture in there, it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then you walk around with it. It was great to be able to have all those different forms of music. But I still liked being able to have the booklet of CDs that I took into my car and put the CD in. You restock it with like 20 different CDs before you went on a ride. And now it's like I got all these CDs, and my Jeep doesn't have a CD player anymore. It wants to play my phone, and I'm like, no, I want to play the CD. And you can't play your CDs. Your stereos don't play your CD. Your computer doesn't play your CD. Some of these records like Back in Black, I can imagine it's like Back in Black has sold X amount of millions of records. It's like, yeah, freaking how many different formats did I have to buy of that album? It's like I have it on freaking cassette, I have it on CD, I have it on freaking iTunes. It's like, yeah, you sold 80 million copies of something 3 times.
Yeah. But it's so awesome because like with the vinyls and especially these reissues, I'm so used to the little itty bitty art, and now it's like this thing I can hold. It's like, whoa, it feels like I'm seeing the record for the first time.
Yeah, the only problem now is that there's not a ton of them. I mean, their vinyl's coming back, but there's not a ton of pressings, so the business is still expensive to make them. They're very expensive to make those records, so the price has to be high. And I was buying $8 records. These vinyls now are so expensive because the plastic is, they had to get, especially during COVID, they were running out of plastic, and they take time to press them. I want to do.
It's like 8 months.
I wanted to do a fun little, like a little pisses me off picture disc, just to have what's that artwork that was on there, just to have a little picture vinyl, because I want to do something in vinyl for my solo stuff. I haven't figured out if I want to do each record. I know some people have been saying that they really want me to do the Warped record on vinyl, which that record has a really neat story to it. I wouldn't mind that. I would do all my records on vinyl if I had the right opportunity. Somebody re-released the Dr. Butcher record on vinyl, and we never even knew it was happening. So
Wow.
it was done basically without me and John knowing, which I think it's supposed to be re-released through somebody different. But I mean, if somebody somehow wound up re-releasing, and I didn't even know. They're like, Dr. Butcher's out on vinyl. I'm like, it is. So,
Wow, that is weird.
yeah,
Yeah, it takes like 8 months to press them too. Like it's
yeah.
just
No, it
like
takes a long
time,
time.
money. Yeah, totally. So you've done so much as a guitarist. How would you describe your creative process as like evolved over time?
The creative process
For just like being a guitar player, like your writing process, your creative process, do you feel like it's
um,
evolved as you
I
have
always
gone through
try,
all
it's
this?
funny. I try when I'm creating, I try to write something that I've never heard. So whether or not, so if I actually, everybody ever says I stole something, it's definitely not on purpose. I try to write riffs and things that I've never heard. So I always try to come up with something a little bit different, which is hard when you've written, I've written hundreds of songs. I've had my solo records out. I've had the Spirits of Fire albums, Savatage album, the Metallica album. It's like I've been on over 120 records, I think. So eventually you kind of not necessarily run out of ideas, but there's just so many different ways you can write a certain style of music. But I always try to write things that I've never heard. And I think that, a
Hmm.
lot of my favorite guitar players always did that. When you listen to Eddie Van Halen or you listen to Randy Rhoads or somebody like a Chris Oliva, they always had riffs and things that you never heard from anybody but them. Their sounds might be quote unquote a little more um, groundbreaking or revolutionary than mine because I tend to just kind of play straight and I haven't really went for any specific kind of tone. I never really did that because I'm too deaf to to know what everything sounds like exactly anyway. So I just want to be in tune and in time. But yeah, I like to just write parts and pieces and notes and things. And I also, when I started to sing, I wanted to do a lot learning from Paul on harmonies and vocals. So I kind of took a lot of his schooling on doing counterpoints and things like that, but I also layered vocals in a lot of weird ways, and I use my voice like a guitar to where it goes from being clean to distorted. I use my voice in different ways. So my creative thing, I think I'm probably one of the only guitar players that went solo as a guitar player and sang more than they played guitar, but I just enjoyed the singing part of it because I think I always wanted to be a singer and I never really knew that I could until I took lessons and really worked on it. But I think my solo records definitely went all over the map as far as guitar, different styles.
Hmm.
I think I probably should do an instrumental record or two one day, but for me, it's just if I'm sitting here and I'm working on music by myself, I get way more of a thrill out of playing back a song I could sing than just something that puts together some fast licks together in harmony with. So it's weird that creative process for me, it's fun to write a heavy riff. Like I just released that single Mayday that I did. It came out on May 1st. And that song has so many different types of my singing in it and so many different types of my guitar writing styles in one song, and I'm pretty excited because it won over 150,000 views on YouTube and just a lyric video. Basically, it's like an animated lyric video, and it's done really well. So for me, it's fun for me to let people hear all the different elements of me that I have. I think that somebody like Zach Wild does that same kind of thing where he can go out there as just a guitar player, but he enjoys doing Zach Sabbath and his Black Label Society thing because even with that and the Pride and Glory, I mean, you heard all those different creative levels that were in him that weren't just in the guitar playing. And for him, he was able to speak more as a guitar player by having songs where he was singing as well instead of just instrumental songs. And I think that that's probably where I get, not saying I'm influenced by Zach because we're kind of out of the same egg, but I think it's the most similar, I think, is in any individual that has been around that I see. It's just in the way that he likes to be that complete image, and that being able to sing his music gives him that control of being able to play the guitar, to follow and speak with it. Because I think it's such a big part of how I became a musician. All those songs, I didn't learn how to play guitar off of instrumental albums. I learned how to play guitar off of Number of the Beast and Mob Rules and Triumph and Rush, and those songs all had great guitar things, but there was songs, there was lyrics and pieces and stories, and I think that's where my creative process. That's why I kind of clung to writing with vocals.
Yeah. Well, it's much more personal,
Yeah,
when you sing on top of it as well,
and
and
I'm
it's
able to be funny.
yeah.
Sometimes I'm a little bit too funny. I would look at Paul and he would just shake his head and I'd be like, "That's me, O'Neill. What can I do?"
Now, Poets and Madmen's the most recent Savatage album. So, what was the recording and writing process of this record? What do you remember about the making of this
Well, the
album?
thing that for Poets, which for me was really different, was that was the only Savatage record where I really was the only guitar player. There was a couple pieces of lead work that Al did, but you know, I was the only guitar player that did Poets. And it, creatively and in the recording process of the whole entire album, what Al did came in towards the end of the recording of the record, and even a couple of the pieces that he did were recordings of solo pieces that I had. So there was, that was my baby, that record, as far as a guitar player. That's as far as Savatage and an album goes, for me there was a lot of, I think, pressure on me because Al was so amazing and so was Chris, and then all of a sudden Al was in Megadeth and I'm by myself, and I'm like, well, I better not suck. So I put a lot of work into that record, but working on songs like Morphine Child, and I had a lot of writing. I think there's at least 8 songs on that record that I got to write on, and songs like Drive and Awaken, that music on those songs, that was all my music. So it was like I had a chance to write, whole songs too, and whole riffs and pieces and parts. There was, I'd written 3 songs with Paul and the guys on Wake of Magellan, but this was more of like the complete process of this record was things that went from day one, and even when all the guitar stuff was done, I was in the studio doing all the tracks from day one. So it was something I was really really proud of. I think it had a really great sound to it. I think it was it's a very strong album. I don't sit
Very.
place anything above anything else, but I just think it's right up there with all the records that I've done, for
Yeah,
sure.
and when I got into Savatage, I had all the albums pretty much, at my choosing. I never like had an as a fan, I never had an album come out, so I got to listen to them all like kind of, with an open mind. That is definitely one of my favorite records the band's ever
Yeah, I
put out.
think too, when I get online and I'll be listening, or if I go through YouTube and songs show up on my playlist and stuff like that, I think some of those songs will come on, and on that record, I think it's still a really fun listen to hear some of
Morphine
those songs that
Child on
I
top of
haven't,
that.
yeah, songs that I haven't heard for a long time. And that
So
Stay
good.
song that opens the record, it's like I hadn't listened to that probably 10 years, and it popped
Wow.
up on my playlist. It's record came out in 2001. So when you hadn't played it and all of a sudden you heard it, you just, you get chills and you start thinking about that record, and there was some really cool stuff in there. And I'm listening to it and I didn't remember my guitar solo stuff. And I had like it's funny when I mentioned Paul McCartney and Wings, because when you listen to that Stay song, you can hear the Maybe I'm Amazed influence of my guitar playing in that song, because there's a harmony in that guitar solo where I'm kind of bending. You hear guitar go ba, And
Yeah.
it's where
Wow.
that influence came from exactly. And I heard, I was like, when I talk about borrowed, that whole style and harmony in that solo, that's where that came from. And that was really Wings Over America was probably my first heavy record I'd gotten, or heavy songs on the Beatles records. And I always liked them. But, that Wings Over America record has some really heavy tunes on it. So it's funny when I heard that, I was listening to it, I was like, wow, there's some cool stuff. And that music in there is all stuff that I had written with John, and it was just like you remember working on that stuff. And we were in an apartment in Astoria writing that record. And it's just, you get a lot of memories.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. I bet. That's so interesting. I feel like we've come full circle with that. That's so amazing. Well, that's why people are so eager, to know what the band's doing and everything, just because of how amazing the latest release is. And really every Savatage record is excellent. So it's really, really
Yeah,
awesome.
it's definitely an amazing catalog, and there's definitely things that happened with the band creatively once Paul got involved, once his production hit and his stories and his lyrics and everything. I think that the bar just kept getting risen. Not that Savatage wasn't, Chris and John weren't rising their bars, musicians, or Johnny and Steve as players. It was just that Paul raised the whole thing. He wanted to have Savatage do things that nobody else had done before, and that's when something like Streets went to a rock band, to a heavy metal band, not necessarily a rock band. Rock bands that had stuff like that, the Who had Tommy and Pinball, but Paul brought it to a metal band, and it was
Oh, yeah.
really the first time I think a heavy metal band had an orchestra, and it was just it was a cool time. It was a great band.
Everyone's so busy with like, TSO and your solo stuff. Is that why there's been kind of like a little hiatus in the band's
Um,
content?
it's really hard to place exactly why. Me personally, I never would have taken a break. So I
Okay.
would have continued Savatage. That's why I wrote Abandon. When you hear
Yes.
my solo record and I wrote Abandon, is because things did happen and we did stop. And, I didn't want that part of my life to stop at that particular point in time. My dog is getting anxious to do something, but
Yeah, yeah.
um,
We'll wrap up here soon.
I don't like to really give any part of that out of me. I just know me personally. Hey, doggy, come here. Quiet. I know that I love that band and I'm there at any second to play. So I think that what, for whatever reasons it did stop, there obviously were enough for it not to play, whatever it was exactly. And I'm not gonna ever hold any regrets or say anything that in any kind of way, because that was my life, and a lot of what happened in my life musically and my career happened because of Paul and Savatage and that band. So like I said, when Savatage plays, I will be there. When it did, I told you I made my mistakes and wandered, and why it didn't, it hasn't, that's not any, really, that's not my place to give that exact, because I don't think anybody can give an exact reason. Probably 80 of them that all fumble together, and it all makes the fact that we haven't toured since 2002, and hopefully we get back out on that stage and get a chance to see the fans again, because I think there's a new generation of fans that never saw us. Being somebody that
Yeah.
was 3 back then is 25. Somebody that's 20 right now was not born. So there's a whole generation of metal fans that have not had a chance to see that band. And I mean, regardless of whether or not we haven't played, I would really love to get a chance to at least let those people see it live. It would be a lot of fun.
As someone born in 98, I would love that. So as we wrap up here, I'm just curious, what's the best way for fans to like keep in touch with you, follow your music and everything you do?
Well, I mean, I have my website. It's crazy. My website's a little bit under construction because my webmaster, he had passed away on a TSO tour, and his twin brother
Uh,
does a lot of work. I'm trying to help him stay connected with his brother in some ways, but my chriscaffery.com really is kind of way behind. So I stay with my Instagram, Chris Caffery official, which you'll see fake ones, but that's the official one with the blue dot. And then I have Chris Caffery Music on Facebook. Those are the two best places. And I have a link to that LinkedIn thingy, that whole, what is that chain you get? I'm
Like
gonna
a
look
link
at it
tree?
now. A link tree. I have a link
Yeah.
tree,
Cool.
which is
Awesome.
probably the best way. I think that's the best way to get to me is the link tree.
Sounds good,
It's
man.
just Linktree/Chris Caffery, and that has the websites, it has the Facebook. So I think in the best perfect way, it goes to my YouTube, goes to my art stuff, it goes to my hot sauce stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that's the smartest way, most current way will be to go through the link to that tree. And I'm
Um
throwing little mini dog vitamins to him to get him to shut up because he gives me an interview limit. Whatever time we did was enough for him.
yeah.
And
Well,
he needs attention now, or he's a German Shepherd. Now you're back and you're moving. So
oh, here we're back. Cool, cool, cool. All
yeah,
right,
but
I'll
you're
do some
moving.
magic editing.
You're delayed with your sound, but
Oh.
I think we should probably finish up before you get stuck again.
Yeah, well, Chris, thank you so much for doing this, man. This
All
has been
right,
a
thank
great
you. And
conversation.
I hope I didn't ramble too much. I have a tendency to talk. It's funny, people go, I had 30 questions for you for this interview, and you answered half the questions in two questions, and it's usually because I just keep talking. So
Well, that makes for the best interviews. You know what I mean? So thank you so much, man.
no,
I'm
thank you.
Brandon Battick, and this is Disturbing the Priest.